Warning. I chain smoke and I say fuck a lot. But I accept myself for the way I am. I accept you too. Viewer discretion advised.
First off, thanks to Rain on Twitter for sharing this with me. And also thank you to Miss T, like Mr. T, but Miss T, who sent me a whole shitload of info on Peter Nygard months ago, and I totally missed it. So thank you for all the information, sorry. Daily News. Women's wear mogul Peter Nygard, accused as vile sex predator, hosted pamper parties to rape and abuse aspiring models and underage girls, according to Manhattan lawsuit. February 13, 2020. Rags to riches garment business legend Peter Nygard was accused of sex trafficking, paid underage, quote, girlfriends to both satisfy his perverse sexual peccadillos and lure new victims to drug-fueled, quote, pamper parties at his beachfront Bahamas home. A stunning new lawsuit alleged Thursday. The Manhattan federal court filing claimed the 76-year-old Nygard raped 7 teenage girls ages 14 to 16 at his private Nygard K getaway in the Bahamas, with some of the terrified teens drugged before they were sexually assaulted. Among the guests at Nygard's luxury property over the years was Prince Andrew. Who would have thunk it? The twisted Nygard asked his house guests to defecate on him, piss in his mouth, and use a sex toy on him. Ugh. I haven't eaten dinner yet. 4 of his teen rape victims were virgins before they were lured to the island at the multimillionaire's warm weather home. Nygard, 76, amassed a decades-old database of more than 7,500 women and underage girls dating back to 1987 and maintained by the Nygard Company's IT department, according to the class action suit that identified 10 Jane Does as plaintiffs. The victims were often recruited through regular company events known as pamper parties, where a woman promised interviews for high-end modeling jobs were instead used for sex at wild parties, featuring cocaine and alcohol inside the Bahamas residence. Nygard used his considerable influence in the fashion industry, his power through corruption of officials, and a network of company employees under his direction to groom and entice underage girls and women.
Canadian fashion designer Peter Nygard clarifying his relationship with the Progressive Liberal Party government after a video surfaced online showing government ministers celebrating here at Nygard Key. That video, titled "Nygard Takes Bahamas Back," shows Nygard's excited reaction to the PLP's most recent general election win, followed by a clip featuring several cabinet ministers shaking hands with Nygard at his home.
I'll tell you about everybody.
Okay, greatest victory ever. I was really supporting this guy. Nobody I would out of power vote.
Minister of Agriculture?
Oh, yes.
Acklands.
That's right.
Ken Dorsey is no Minister of Housing and Environment. Pleasure meeting you.
Good to meet you.
Good to meet you, sir.
Chairman of the Free National Movement, Darren Cash, raised the alarm as the video circulated online, claiming it showed the PLP administration is far too compromised to govern effectively. Following a press conference at his Lyford Key home, our news team asked Nygard how he felt about such criticism.
How did that appear just now? I mean, this is at least a year ago. That's almost a joke. Almost an insult to even write such nonsense.
Nygard says he has opened his doors to many people over the years, from cabinet ministers to international celebrities, including Oprah Winfrey. He says there's nothing political behind it.
Dr. Gomez spoke with our news team shortly after launching the BTC telemedicine lecture room at Princess Margaret Hospital's Oncology Center. The health minister claims the video was shot prior to the 2012 general election in a setting that was nothing more than casual conversation.
Oh, I was at Nygard. I was invited to barbecue or something like that. Prior to it was, I can't remember when, it was before the elections, and that was my time there.
However, as we showed you in the video, Nygard is congratulating the ministers on winning the 2012 general election.
Nygard would use means of alcohol, drugs, force, fraud, and/or other forms of coercion to engage in commercial sex acts with these children and women. in many cases with knowledge that they were less than 18 years old. Nygard launched his business in 1968. He has steered clear of the Bahamas property since he was sentenced last year to 90 days in jail and $150,000 in fines for alleged environmental violations. At Nygard K.
For decades, this Canadian fashion mogul has been enlarging his property. He has almost doubled it. This was accomplished by using groins to trap sand as it naturally flows by. He has been dredging the seafloor and adding the spoil to his property. He has never had any permits for the creation of new land. The fact is, billionaire Peter Nygard has simply been stealing Crown land. Save the Bays had to go to court to end this violation of Bahamian law. Before this injunction, nobody did anything to stop him.
Back in 1987, Nygard designed and built the luxurious property that, according to the lawsuit, was turned into a den of torture where underage girls were routinely assaulted. Where have I seen this guy before? Wait a minute. Is that Dog the Bounty Hunter's dad? Could be. From Forbes, November 2010. Among other things, Nygard has been accused of abusive labor practices, tax evasion, sexual harassment, and rape. He has also been called the Hugh Hefner of Canada. Punching back hard, he has sued his accusers and intimidated his critics with a small army of lawyers. Quote, "No one has ever disobeyed my orders and gotten away with it," he once raged, according to the testimony of a former business partner. A former stewardess on his private plane told of one incident in which Nygard was accompanied by a bevy of topless women. At one point, mid-flight, she recalls, Nygard, wild-haired and with his bathrobe open, began berating her co-worker, yelling, "You are nothing, you are garbage." When the stewardess tried to calm him down, he screamed, "I am God. Do you understand?" Even after the security director intervened, she claims, Nygard continued to rage, shouting, "This is my plane. I can do whatever the hell I want." In the late 90s, Nygard paid to settle 3 sexual harassment complaints filed by former employees with the Manitoba Human Rights Commission. One of the women, a 27-year-old travel coordinator, said she repeatedly brushed off Nygard's touches and sexual advances. Another, a 39-year-old communications manager, claimed that Nygard added skinny dipping to the agenda of a business meeting. While in the Bahamas, where Nygard maintains a home and office on a huge estate, Nygard, quote, frequently was grabbing himself, wearing a very small bathing suit. When called to his office, I would find him in a state of undress, pants open, no shirt, or with his hand down in the front of his pants, fondling himself. He also faced a sexual harassment suit in 1996 from an LA employee who claimed that, against her wishes, she spent the night in Peter Nygard's bed and engaged in sexual intercourse with him. She later rejected his advances, she claims, and eventually was terminated. Back in 1980, the Free Press reported that Nygard had been charged by Winnipeg authorities with raping an 18-year-old girl. The charges were later dropped, and he blamed the police, saying they used poor judgment. Perhaps his loudest legal ruckus of late has roared out of the Bahamas. In 1987, Nygard bought a 4.5-acre estate on a peninsula near the waspy enclave of Lyford Cay. A decade later, he built the place into what he calls his, quote, dream home. A 150,000 square foot Mayan-style resort featuring 12 themed cabanas, volcanic smoking temples, a helipad, a disco, a casino, and a human aquarium with sharks on one side of the glass. He's hosted the likes of Robert De Niro, Oprah, Michael Jackson, Prince Andrew, and George H.W. Bush. Oprah ain't saying nothing about this guy either.
I love gold.
And I found this Facebook post on a page called Sistahs Abused. It's pretty long, so I'm not going to read it all, but I will read a couple things that stood out to me. It's from May 21st, 2018. Peter Nygard, King of the Sex Slave Trade in the Bahamas, by Justin Sands, former special assistant to Nygard at his island getaway in the Bahamas. My name is Justin Sands, and I am a citizen of the Bahamas. Born on December 15, 1978 in Nassau. For a period stretching over several years, I was employed by Canadian clothing manufacturer Peter Nygard as a property manager of his compound on Nygard Key. During that time, I lived in a gatehouse on the property. While employed by Mr. Nygard, I witnessed numerous, highly disturbing criminal activities. These activities included crimes against people, including rape and kidnapping, and crimes against the Bahamian state, including frequent customs and immigration violations that robbed the Bahamas of significant tax revenues, probably more than millions of dollars. These crimes, which I personally observed, were facilitated by corrupt members of the Royal Bahamas Police Force, local politicians, and Bahamian government officials. I fled the Bahamas in December of 2015 because I feared for my safety, not just because of the total disregard for law and order demonstrated by Mr. Nygard, but because of his powerful sway over local thugs, corrupt politicians, and some members of the RBPF, the police, who were complicit to Mr. Nygard and aided in his illicit activities rather than enforce the law. What I witnessed was clearly illegal and dangerous, involving the trafficking of women, rape, and kidnapping. Young women were routinely brought to Nygard Key under false pretense and coerced into performing sexual acts while under the influence of alcohol. If the women refused, they often were held hostage and prohibited from leaving the compound and returning home until they complied. While it is true that many women came to Mr. Nygard's compound out of their own volition, Bahamian prostitutes were paid a standard rate of $300, while prostitutes flown in from abroad received $500 or $1,000. Many of the young women were gullible, and they were deliberately and easy deceived into believing that they were going on a short, all-expenses-paid vacation. This was particularly true of young women flown in from the U.S. They did not understand the circumstances. They often didn't even know that they were traveling to a different country until they arrived in the Bahamas, and were ushered through the airport without showing their passports, without clearing customs or immigration, because Mr. Nygard had paid off the customs and immigration officials. This ruse was facilitated using Mr. Nygard's private plane. He owns a Boeing 727. Well, are you starting to see some patterns? Which he and his staff refer to as Enforce, that flies in women from overseas without having to go through customs and immigration. Typically, when Mr. Nygard came to the Bahamas, he brought 5 to 8 women with him, sometimes listing them as flight attendants on the plane's manifest. The planes often arrived at night when security and customs enforcement were lax, and it was easier for Mr. Nygard to pay off officials not to search the plane or its contents or document the passengers. When unsuspecting women arrived this way, it made them dependent on Mr. Nygard for their departure because they often had no passport, no return ticket, and no money, and they were forced to stay at his compound until they performed. This was not the dream they were sold when coming, but they were forced to stay there until they got with the program. This scam was also facilitated by Mr. Nygard's staff and his regular go-to women. For the sake of appearances, they were referred to as, quote, girlfriends, but they were all paid for sex, and in fact, they're call girls. Part of the responsibility of these regular women is to recruit other women to come to Mr. Nygard's compound. It's part of the incentive. If you sleep with Mr. Nygard and wanted him to pay you, you had to bring another woman with you who would have sex with him. The regular women themselves became pimps and could get additional $150 for bringing another woman with them. That sounds familiar too. It was a responsibility of everybody on the staff to recruit young women, and that often included bringing pictures to Mr. Nygard for approval. They had to be young, under 25, pretty, and thin. There was a weight restriction. And once they came to the property, everyone was responsible for getting them liquored up and selling the dream. But when a woman refused participation in Mr. Nygard's sex routine, the other girls would ostracize her, ply her with shots of Patron tequila, and coerce her until she relented. I had to watch hours of sexual torment, and it was sickening. It was often complicated by the fact that Mr. Nygard was taking steroids, which affected his own performance, and he inflicted hours of torture on the women when he had problems functioning. Steroids, don't they shrink your nuts? Mr. Nygard paid meticulous attention to detail. He threw pamper parties every Sunday that were hugely indulgent affairs that were a prelude to sex. They included volleyball games, free manicures and pedicures, and massage. There's another one in the pattern. The score from Phantom of the Opera had to be played exactly 7 minutes before sunset, and torches were lit across the property. Sounds like a ritual. After dinner, guests would gamble, playing Texas Hold'em with a $50 cash buy-in. Afterwards, Mr. Nygard would retire to his room with one or several women. Anyway, I'll leave a link to this post because it's pretty long, but that was just a couple patterns that I noticed.
Well, I'm most passionate really about the most powerful of stem cells, which is embryonic stem cell. That is the stem cell that we're born with. And I now have broken through, it's called SCNT, it was announced all over the news, and I broke through taking my old skin cell. I took a woman's egg, took her DNA out of it, put my DNA into it, and grew it in vitro, and developed my own stem cell lines.
Wow.
I'm the only guy in the world today who has me in a petri dish before I was born. Now you can take those immortal stem cells, plant it back in your body, and renew your body parts. It's personal quest. I just want to personally make sure that I do everything possible to keep myself alive, everything possible to keep myself healthy. I want to do preventive medicine. And then I start discovering more and more about it, and I start being a leading edge on this stuff. I have taken more stem cells today than anybody else in the world. And I stay dedicated to it now for the last 5 or 6 years, taking stem cells 4 times a year. And the good news is, look at now all my medical records on my body, and it's working.
I knew I recognized him. Holy shit, it's Dracula. Fucking stoned.